Thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Rami Lote. I'm a project manager here at the FedEx Institute of Technology. As part of our growing series of speakers, world-class speakers here at the FedEx Institute of Technology, we are very happy and very honored to welcome Dr. Johnny Green, Jr., who serves as the Associate Laboratory Director for Mechanical and Thermal Engineering Sciences at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or known as the NREL. He oversees the NREL's transportation, building, wind, water, geothermal, advanced manufacturing, concentrating solar power, and Arctic research programs, which encompass a portfolio of more than $200 million and a workforce of about 700 individuals. Johnny also co-leads the foundational experimental program platform, for the Department of Energy's Advanced Research on Integrated Energy Systems, or ARES initiative. Prior to the NREL, Johnny held a number of leadership roles at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, serving as director of the Energy and Transportation Science Division and group leader for fuels, engines, and emissions research. Johnny is also a fellow of the American Association for Advancement of Science, or the AAAS, and is an SAE International Fellow. He serves as chairman of the National GEM Consortium and sits on the board for NACME, or the National Action Council for Minorities in Engineering. Excellent. In addition, he serves on numerous advisory boards at Georgia Tech, the University of Tennessee, which I'm sorry to say, boo here, University of Tennessee, and the University of Memphis. So thumbs up for the University of Memphis. There we go. Love the background. Love that. He is a University of Memphis alum, which we love, with a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering and a master's and doctorate in mechanical engineering from Georgia Tech. And without further ado, Dr. Green, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for participating today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Great to be back, even if it's virtually, and look forward to this opportunity to share a little bit about some of the work that we're doing at NREL, as we call it, in the clean energy space. So I am going to try to share my screen here, and hopefully that will work. So let me see. So I'm assuming that everyone can see my screen. Is that correct?
Yes, looks great. Thank you.
Awesome. So yeah, thanks once again for having me. And yeah, I guess I'm coming home on two fronts. One, I'm a graduate of the University of Memphis, and actually, while I was at the University of Memphis, I actually worked at FedEx on the weekends for a little while. And so bringing a little bit of my history in two different areas together with this. So thanks to this invitation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, our work in renewable energy and carbon reducing research at NREL. So let's see. All right. So I think a lot of you are aware that we're really, dealing with a triple planetary crisis that threatens the health of our planet. And so a lot of the work that we do at NREL is focused on, and in the Department of Energy broadly, is focused on how do we help to mitigate and address this triple planetary crisis. So we have pollution as one of those issues, climate change, and also biodiversity loss. And so these three different challenges really, create issues for us being able to inhabit the planet and having, great balance between human existence and, planetary health. So hopefully we can work together to address all three of these challenges. So in terms of pollution, air pollution, as you all know, is a large cause of disease and premature death. Plastic is a major pollutant in water systems. There's tons of plastic in oceans and waterways that could triple by 2040. And, one of the main drivers of biodiversity loss and climate change is pollution. So, just some statistics that I'm sure a lot of you are aware of. 9 million premature deaths caused annually by pollution. If you look at CO2 levels in the atmosphere, they're over 400 ppm. That's in 2021, that's a record high. And then, the acidity of our oceans is increasing. There's a 30% increase in acidity due to absorption of CO2. So, this is, definitely one of the things that we're trying to address in partnership with the National Laboratory System, the Department of Energy, Industry, and Academia. The second challenge is climate change. Climate change, as I'm sure we've heard, we're concerned about temperature rises above 1.5 degrees C. And to get there, we would have to cut emissions by 45% by 2030 and have a net zero carbon by 2050 to achieve that goal. Optimistically, I hope that we can, but I'm not sure if we will. And we may have to move more towards adaptation, and some of the consequences could be droughts, wildfires, rising sea levels, flooding, extreme weather, and it can disrupt habitats of plants and animals. And, just a personal story, I was at a meeting with a colleague last week, and during the meeting, they've got a home in Fort Lauderdale, and their home was, flooding during our meeting, and they had a 1 in 1,000 year rainfall. I think they had, over 2 inches of rain within a 24-hour period, which was, I think, even more than what they've gotten during hurricanes, and there wasn't even a hurricane. So we're having more and more of these extreme events, and I'm sure a lot of us have been touched by some of the extreme weather and conditions we've seen. Just in terms of some numbers and metrics, it's estimated that 700 million people could be displaced by drought by 2030. There could be, there's been an 8 to 9 inch rise in sea level since 1880, which is impacting coastal areas. A lot of the coastal areas in the Southeast are concerned about sea level rise. And we've had a 40% decline in ice covering the Arctic. So once again, a lot of things to be concerned about in this space. And the third one is biodiversity loss, and this could be caused by, habitat destruction from pollution and deforestation related to climate change. It could impact food supplies, clean water access, which is very important to sustain life. And losing these carbon sinks from trees and other forestation can exacerbate climate change. And once again, just a few statistics. We've seen a 69% decline of animal populations since 1970. We've seen a 47% decline in natural ecosystems, and a 50% of live coral cover on coral reefs have been lost since the 1870s. So, a lot of biodiversity loss as well. So hopefully we can all work together to address these three challenges and make sure that we can have a thriving and robust existence here on planet Earth. So we do this in partnership. So, how do we transform energy together? At NREL, we have a research strategy that's focused on 3 critical areas that align with trying to address the 3 challenges that I mentioned in terms of climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. So the first one is called integrated energy pathways. And in this area, I would say it's the foundation. It's where a lot of our current work is being done, is looking at basically how do we build out the future decarbonized energy system? How do we integrate and optimize renewables, buildings, industrial loads, energy storage, and transportation loads to modernize our future energy systems in a way that's safe, secure, resilient, and as I mentioned before, decarbonize to help us address some of the challenges with pollution, climate change, and biodiversity loss. So assuming that we're successful there, and we're anticipating that most of clean energy on the grid will be coming from renewables. Some will be from nuclear and other sources, but the trend seems to suggest that most of that will be renewables. Assuming that we're successful there and we have low cost electricity, then we can look at, okay, how do we use that low cost electricity from renewables or other sources to convert waste gases like carbon dioxide, for example. It could be through carbon capture, and use that using different catalytic processes or electrochemical processes to convert those chemical bonds into different chemicals. It could be a sustainable aviation fuel, for example, or materials, or a fuel synthesis or energy storage technology. So how do we address kind of the industrial decarbonization sector in a different way if we have low cost electricity? Could we make green steel, for example, from wind and hydrogen, for example? Those are some examples of electrons to molecules, or power to X, as they call it in Europe. And then the last one is the circular economy for energy materials. So assuming that we're successful in the first two of developing these new energy technologies, how do we think about recyclability and sustainability from the beginning and build that in, so when we design, we know how to recycle, reuse, manufacture these reliable and stable sources of energy relevant materials and processes. So that's what we're focused on in those three, what we call critical objectives, to help us achieve our goals. So just talking a little bit about that, of how examples of how we want to do that. So, I mentioned before, increased use of clean energy sources can then reduce fossil fuels, which would curb CO2 emissions and reduce pollution, and then also reduce pollutions, but then help to mitigate climate change and address some of the harm to plants, animals, and their habitats. If we're successful with how do we electrons to molecules, then we'll be able to convert some of the waste gases like CO2 and reduce their pollution. And maybe there's some hard to decarbonize sectors, and so you can maybe use CO2 sequestration in some of those sectors to sequester CO2 and prevent it from going to the atmosphere and increasing the temperature of the atmosphere and address climate change. And if we were successful, then it reduces drilling and enhances ecosystems for a lot of organisms. And in terms of circular economy for energy materials, if we're successful there, let's take plastic waste in oceans. If we can reduce that, there would be less waste and pollution there. We've got ideas about how do you maybe implant what I would call a Trojan horse into plastic materials, where if you expose it to UV light, it would degrade into harmless materials, biomaterials. That would be an example. If that was research was successful, we could reduce that waste, and then that would be less disruption to biological systems. So a little bit about the National Lab System for those of you who may not be aware. So the Department of Energy has 17 national laboratories. The National Renewable Energy Lab, or NREL as we call it, is located in the Denver, Colorado metro area. We have 2 campuses in the Denver area, our main campus in Golden, and what we call our Flatirons campus near Boulder, where we have large scale wind turbines and solar panels. Each of those campuses are 300 acres. Then we also, in Alaska, we have a campus there as well, focused on extreme weather events and Arctic research. But as I mentioned, there's 17 labs. Our focus is energy efficiency and renewable energy. Idaho National Lab is focused on nuclear energy. The National Energy Technology Laboratory is focused on carbon sequestration and carbon management. So those are what we call the 3 applied energy labs. Then there's 3 nuclear national security labs: Los Alamos, Sandia, and Lawrence Livermore. And you also have Savannah River National Lab, which is focused on environmental management. And then there's 10 Office of Science labs. So Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which is right there in East Tennessee. I worked at Oak Ridge for 20 years before joining NREL about 6.5 years ago. So that's why I have linkages to the University of Tennessee. But there's a lot, Pacific Northwest National Lab, Lawrence Berkeley, Argonne are examples of some of the 10 Office of Science National Labs. So we all have a slightly different mission, but we're trying to go from fundamental basic science and use that fundamental science to address challenges in applied energy, be it clean energy or nuclear energy or carbon management, or how do you secure and stabilize our nuclear stockpile and support national security. Okay, so a little bit more about NREL at a glance. Our workforce, we've got over 3,000 folks in our workforce, a lot of expertise in renewable power, energy efficiency, transportation. We have a lot of expertise in systems integration. A lot of our work is focused on how do you get different technologies to work together. A lot of work with partners. Since we're an applied energy lab, we don't really commercialize technologies. We partner with others to help them commercialize it. And so we will do a lot of work in that space. In terms of our partnerships with the private sector and non-Department of Energy research is about 131 million in funding. Our total lab funding last year was about 700 million. So our non-DOE work is a significant fraction of that. Lots of agreements with large and small businesses alike across industry, academia, and government. In my bio, there were a couple of mentions that, I have the pleasure of serving as the chairman of the National GEM Consortium, which is an organization focused on providing graduate fellowships to underrepresented minorities in STEM. And I also serve on the board of directors of NACME. And so NREL is very engaged in those organizations and others that are focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And really, if we want to, have a clean energy future, we have to have it be accessible for all. So energy accessibility is really important to us, and trying to, make sure that the work and the research that we're doing, that we're getting ideas from a spectrum of the population, so that we can understand what the needs are in various communities and how that we can get those technologies into those communities. And I'm proud to say that I was able to help the University of Memphis recently join the National GEM Consortium, and hopefully the University of Memphis can also join NACME as well, I hope. But I think, this, we try to make sure that this is an important aspect of our work, to make sure that what we're doing is accessible to as many people and communities as possible. So a little bit about some of our facilities and, at the different scales that we work at. So if you look at the left, it starts in foundational science. So that could be bench scale discovery, materials, chemical, biological, or engineering levels. Then that scales up. So the figure on the bottom there, the Energy Systems Integration Facility, that's a facility that we have now that allows us to conduct research at the 2 megawatt scale, that looks at individual buildings. It could be commercial or residential buildings, a lot of grid integration, electric vehicle charging work. So a lot of research at that scale going on. The figure above that, energy materials and processing at scale, is a facility that's being designed. So it is not, it's in the, working on being constructed. So that's something that we have in the works. And that facility, focused on how do we work with industry to look at how do we scale up energy, materials, and processes to help us decarbonize the buildings and industrial sector. And then as we go to the far right, at the Flatirons campus that I mentioned, that's up near Boulder, we have large scale wind turbines, solar panels, energy storage systems, hydrogen systems, electric vehicle charging systems that allow us to look at technologies at the 20 megawatt scale. And that's part of the ARES platform, or Advanced Research and Integrated Energy Systems platform. So we scale from basic science up to large scale systems that we de-risk in partnership with the industry, and high performance computing, modeling, simulation, and analysis, be it techno-economic or other analyses, underpin all of what we do. So I mentioned that we've got expertise in a lot of these different spaces. In terms of renewable power, we help develop solar technology, and that has really taken off in recent years, and is being commercialized. And to reach some of our future energy goals, over a terawatt of solar will probably be needed. Wind has also taken off. If you've driven through the Midwest or Texas, you see wind turbines everywhere. It's providing a lot of energy. And so, it's probably going to be over a terawatt of wind needed to help us decarbonize. So a lot of expertise here, there. But we're also looking at water power, being conventional hydro. So TVA, as you all know, have, an extensive dam system that could be used to generate power or store energy. But we're also looking at marine water power, of how do you harvest wave energy for energy production as well in remote areas. We're also looking at geothermal energy as well. So Hawaii is one place. There's places overseas. Colorado has an interest in it, and a few other states, of how do we use the thermal energy underground, either for energy generation or energy storage, or even for heating and cooling buildings with geothermal heat pump systems, for example. So those are all examples of some of the work that we're doing in that space. In terms of sustainable transportation, we're looking at research on how do we make sustainable aviation fuels. FedEx does a lot of shipping and transportation with heavy duty trucks and with airplanes. And so how to use sustainable aviation fuels for airplanes, or maybe other e-fuels or biofuels for heavy duty vehicles. So that's an example of some of the work that we're doing there. We're doing a lot of work with hydrogen and fuel cells, where it could be used in some transportation applications, or for industrial applications, or as a long-term energy storage medium. And a lot of work in transportation and mobility. One example is we're helping the Department of Energy and Department of Transportation and their joint energy for Office of Transportation plan the build out of 500,000 electric vehicle chargers across the nation. So we're working on that right now with those agencies. In terms of energy efficiency and looking at how do we decarbonize buildings and industry, we do a lot of work in that space, looking at, how do we develop more grid interactive buildings that share energy with the grid. It could be with rooftop solar, home charging, energy efficient appliances, insulation. How does that all work together in the new energy system? And then once again, how do we decarbonize our industrial and manufacturing sectors as well? And we do a lot of work with state, local, and tribal governments as well to help provide energy efficiency improvements like the weatherization program, for example. And then systems integration, how do we embed security and resilience of these technologies? How do we build out our future modernized grid system, and look at how do these different technologies integrate and work together. So now I'll go a little bit into how we take these different technologies and capabilities and really incorporate them in our research, whether it be at the research and development level, demonstration level, or deployment level, to once again try to make sure that the energy solutions that we have are available to as many people as possible and done in a manner that is as equitable as we can. We've been working with and partnering with communities for several years. We've worked with over 2,000 communities and helping them with energy transition planning. It spans several states all across the country, and we provide technical assistance, capacity building, workforce development, and a lot more. And so there's a lot of different programs. I mentioned weatherization, clean cities. There's just tons of different programs that we supported to help communities achieve their clean energy goals, which may look different for each community. Each community has different resources, and they won't all have the same strategy. And so we try to partner with them to help them meet their clean energy goals. So one example of that is a study that we performed a few years ago for the city of Los Angeles. The city of Los Angeles came to us and said, hey, we would like to have a roadmap on how to have a 100% renewable energy system and to see if it's feasible and what the cost would be. And so we did a 3-year study for the city of Los Angeles and provided options like, these are the scenarios and options through analysis and modeling of, how you could achieve that goal. And so that successful was, extremely successful, has a lot of visibility with the Secretary of Energy and a lot of other folks. And, in short, it showed that it is possible. We can probably get 80 to 90% there now with known renewable energy strategies, but the last 10 to 20% would probably take some emerging long-term energy storage strategies and use of hydrogen. And so, but with that roadmap, they are, now thinking about what kind of investments they want to make to their future energy system to fully decarbonize it. And so as a follow-up to that, we're currently working with them on what we call LA 100 equity strategies to say, how can we ensure that the transition to 100% clean energy with high levels of electrification is done in a way that's equitable and affordable and accessible to all communities. And so that's the next phase of the project that we're working on right now. And, hopefully we can have success in supporting that. If you are interested in learning more about this, you can go to la100.org to see, what we've done in the past and what we're currently working on in this space. And one of the things I'll talk about here shortly is what we're doing to try to expand these types of tools across the country to communities across the country. So if Memphis, for example, wanted to, develop clean energy plan, there's some program opportunities from the Department of Energy that might support that. So I mentioned, the LA 100 study as an example, which focused on modeling analysis to give options or roadmaps as to how to have a clean energy future. What Aries does is provides the experimental validation to say what is possible and what is feasible, and help de-risk technologies to give key stakeholders confidence to take the roadmap results and then implement them into actionable plans. And so the building blocks of Aries are three components. One is the Energy Systems Integration Facility that I mentioned earlier, which looks at technologies at the 2 megawatt scale. So think about maybe a small neighborhood or small community with, buildings, vehicles. It could be, rooftop solar, distributed wind, but, like I said, 2 megawatt scale, maybe neighborhood scale. And then the next scale is the Flatirons campus, where we can look at 20 megawatts. We have large scale wind turbines, solar arrays, as I mentioned. At that scale, we can look at thousands of devices, where at the Energy System Integration Facility, we look at hundreds of devices there. And then, there's some technologies that are at much larger scales that we can't always have all the assets co-located to look at. And so that's where the third piece, what we call the virtual emulation environment, where we use a fast internet system that the Department of Energy owns to connect to other labs and other potential partners to do, kind of these virtual hardware in the loop, almost like digital twinning type or virtual power plant type experiments, where we might bring in small modular nuclear reactors that maybe Idaho National Lab is an expert in, and how do you couple that with renewables and energy storage for a clean energy system that might be a fit for a region with those type of energy resources. So that's kind of the three building blocks and the three different scales that we look at. And you can look at, very large, multi-megawatt, gigawatt systems, and, even millions of devices with a virtual emulation environment. So, as I mentioned before, this research platform is really used to accelerate our transition to a decarbonized energy system. So how do we troubleshoot and de-risk new technologies, embed cybersecurity, accelerate deployment, and help reach local and national decarbonization goals for 2030 and 2050, and look at system-wide resilience to pinpoint weakness and solutions. So some of you may remember there was an ice storm in Texas a few years ago, where a lot of assets were shut down, even this past winter in the Nashville, in the TVA territory, and in Memphis. My father still lives in Memphis. They were without power. So, we looked at the Texas system, for example, and provided some congressional testimony about, what went wrong with all the different technologies: natural gas, nuclear, renewables. One of the main issues was a lot of the limits that were set in terms of temperature. The investment that were made didn't assume that the temperatures would get that low. So that's where climate change impacts change that and change what our resilient strategies are. So, as we think about this future energy system, it also has to adjust to climate change so that we can be more resilient as well. And unfortunately, state of Tennessee and the city of Memphis is all too familiar with power outages, especially as the temperatures dipped. I think it was right before Christmas Eve. There was a significant drop in temperature. I was actually in Memphis when that happened. I was lucky I was able to get out, but yeah, that caused huge disruptions in Memphis, Nashville, and across the state. So we've got to factor that in, that we're going to have more of those extreme events, and how do we have a system that's ready to handle and take that on. So in terms of the platform, Aries, we're focused on three challenges. One, how do we scale up the size of technologies? Energy storage, for example, how do we scale up those energy storage systems for very large areas? How do we securely control millions of devices? If we look at the Bay Area in California, we've got electric vehicle chargers or devices, thermostats. We've got rooftop solar, smart connected infrastructure. So we can have millions of devices just in a region like the Bay Area. You can't control that with human interventions. So you have to use autonomous systems or artificial intelligence with machine learning, advanced controls to control the complex future energy system. So how do we do that? That's the second area. And then the third is how do we get different technologies to work together? I mentioned nuclear and renewables as an example. How do we get those technologies to work together in a way that, or at levels even that they haven't worked at before? We have a good understanding of how to operate a grid with a small amount of renewables. As you get to 50, 60, 70, 80% renewables on the grid operates differently. So how do you make sure that the grid is reliable and stable as we go to that? So once again, this is all supporting the transition to a decarbonized energy system. So just to kind of visually show the scale that I talked about, I mentioned the Energy Systems Integration Facility, hundreds of devices, kind of that community scale, 2 megawatts. If you look at maybe a little bit more of a, city scale, maybe the Flatirons campus can maybe represent that. Tens of thousands of devices up to 20 megawatt building blocks. And then the virtual emulation environment could be a regional, national scale that looks at millions of devices at a much greater than 20 megawatt scale. This is really a unique platform. This was actually launched under the previous administration. So we've got bipartisan support for it. And so, we're looking at, once again, infrastructure at scale that's unique to NREL and the National Lab System, having that flexibility to investigate and de-risk different complex configurations that may vary from community to community or state to state or region to region. And we can look at the entire system, generation, demand and loads and storage, and put in a real world context. And once again, this is all done through partnerships with industry, academia, and also with key local and community stakeholders. And I give a few examples of that coming up here shortly. So one example of that is a program that the Secretary of Energy announced at the Conference of Mayors a few months ago called Clean Energy to Communities, or C2C. And this is a program that's tailored to support and help communities reach their ambitious clean energy goals. And so Secretary Granholm challenged us to work with the Department of Energy to develop a multi-lab program that would take the things that we learned from LA 100, but instead of working with one utility over 3 years, how do we work with multiple communities on a much shorter time scale to help have community-led goal sharing, but then not just do the pathway analysis and road mapping, but actually do technical advisement through experimental technology validation using the Aries platform, which would then give utilities and local governments and communities the confidence to then deploy those technology solutions that work best for them and implement those technologies. So that's something I think that could be an opportunity and something that might be of interest to this audience. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. So with the Clean Energy to Communities program, we're using the collective power of the Department of Energy and lab capabilities. And so this is a example of the what I mentioned, the virtual emulation environment, where we can look at a wind turbine at a Flatirons campus and solar panels at the Flatirons campus. And then we could look at heat pumps, water heaters, and charging station data from the energy systems integration facility on our main campus. And we can basically create a virtual representation, or almost like a digital twin, that if you had a community that had wind and solar, or was considering, how much wind and solar do we need, and how do we have smart charging and electric heat pumps, we're considering that for our community. Will this work? Does it work for, the different types of building stock that we have in our community? So this is an example of kind of a clean energy sandbox to help communities validate potential clean energy solutions, see which ones work and which ones don't, and which situations they do work and which situations that they don't work as well. So there's a couple of examples that we've piloted so far. So we worked with Fairbanks, Alaska. I mentioned we have a campus in Fairbanks. We worked with the local utility there that is considering retiring 50-watt coal plant, and they wanted to know, their question was, hey, can we retire this 50-megawatt coal plant and replace it with wind and storage? And so they asked us, hey, can you give us some analysis and experimental validation to give us confidence that, we could do this? Could you do some what if scenarios to help see if this would work for that region? And so, some of the unique challenges that community faces: extreme weather. It can get 40 below in Alaska, and the weather and demand changes between summer and winter, and the cost of fuel and energy is extremely high in Alaska. And then also, how do you repurpose some of the existing infrastructure that they have? And so some of the early results that we've had, worked with the Golden Valley Electric Association, with the local utility, we've been able to increase the utility and the city's confidence about replacing the coal plant with wind and energy storage. We've identified opportunities for additional energy storage by retrofitting the coal plants to thermal energy storage, so those assets can still be used. And we also, gave them the confidence that they could actually install more wind than they thought they could. They thought they would be limited. And then also, utilities in the area are requesting to use the Aries platform to evaluate their clean energy scenarios for their communities. A second example that we're undertaking right now in Colorado is working with our local utility, Xcel Energy, who is increasing its renewable electricity on the grid. They've got a line called the Rush Creek line, and it's a 150-mile long transmission system, and they're adding 1.5 gigawatts of wind to serve the Denver metro area. And we're saying, how do we help them improve the reliability of the system with this added amount of renewables on the system? And how do we make sure that, any instability challenges are well understood, and we can help them, understand any, potential instabilities or anomalies, and help them address them to make sure that power is not impacted at all for the community. And so, some of the things that we're planning on doing is evaluating the protection scheme for Xcel in this area for the Rush Creek line, using some of this same, kind of emulation techniques, and then analyze the stability of the system, measuring stability of their system, understanding some of the oscillations, and doing a proof of concept remote stability evaluation using the Aries platform to help them better understand how their line is operating and behaving with 1.5 gigawatts of wind added to the system. So those are a couple of examples of the types of what we call in-depth analysis that can be provided to communities. So my last slide is just talking about this program C2C, clean energy communities. There's different offerings. So the first one on the left, in-depth partnerships, I gave a couple of examples of what that might look like. Those are normally, maybe 1 to 3 year projects to have a little bit of a research element to it, where they go from analysis to validation to deployment. There's a link there to find more information and look at potential opportunities to partner with the Department of Energy and see if your community can participate in that. But there's also less detailed programs on a cohort model. In the middle of those engagements are about 6 months, where we put together different cohorts of communities that may have similar goals and help them learn from one another. So that's another type of engagement if an in-depth partnership isn't a good fit right now. And then there's also what we call expert match, where a community may not know, what they need and what the roadmap is. They may be at a very early stages. And so we can provide experts across the national lab system to help them understand, what some of the technology options are for electric vehicle charging, or could be solar panels or nuclear energy, or, whatever that is. And so across the bottom, we have links to all 3 of those areas, and there's different partnering opportunities from the Department of Energy across all 3 of those. And so I'm at the end. Hopefully I didn't take up too much time, and hopefully we got some time for Q&A.
No, thank you, Dr. Green. That was very thorough, very engaging, and very interesting, especially that part about the kind of pilot programs in Alaska. Can you go a little bit more into that, about how the conversation started and kind of where it's ongoing now? I know you said you did a pilot project for converting, I think it was a coal station, to clean renewable energy.
Yes.
How did those conversations start, and where do you see them? How do you see the applicability going across the board, or is it applicable across the board?
Sure. So it actually started, the governor of Alaska visited with us, I guess it was Christmas, right before Christmas, maybe in 2021, I think. And Alaska was considering a renewable portfolio standard. Mm-hmm. And they asked us to do some analysis to see if it was feasible from a cost and other perspective. And so we did some initial analysis, and then we engaged with utility, as we were doing that. And then the utility said, well, hey, we've got this specific, challenge where we've got this coal plant that isn't performing as, we would like. And there's some EPA compliance issues, and we're trying to look at alternative solutions. And can you help us assess the viability of that? So that was how that initial pilot kicked off. And that was one of the building blocks for the C2C program, which is $50 million funding opportunity that's out there right now for the Department of Energy, that fits into those 3 different categories of expert match, cohorts, and in-depth. So you can, if you do a, Google search on C2C or clean energy to communities, you'll, see our website and, see, how to apply for these different technical assistance programs.
Very cool. And yes, Bridget, I'm about to do that. Thank you so much for sharing that link. I'm going to drop a link to some of the NREL's initiatives here. I think we'll give a minute or two for anyone else who's joined us to ask any questions. I know we are running a little short on time, but we do thank Dr. Green for his time today. I think I'll give it another minute or so.
Sure.
Well, maybe that's a sign that you answered everyone's questions while you were speaking there, that no one has chimed in, which is not a bad thing. I think that's a great thing to say. Your talk today covered everyone's questions and topics. So it looks like, Yeah, there we go. We do have someone who said great talk. That's very true. Thank you so much for typing in your response. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and end our session here. If you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself. I can connect you with Dr. Green, and we'll go from there. Thank you so much, Dr. Green. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
All right, go Tigers.
Go Tigers. Thank you much.
Thanks.